Hi everyone. Like Dr. Roberts said, my name is Jessica Hagen and I am a recent graduate of the Public History Master's Program here at Loyola. Well, there, I guess, Lakeshore campus. As some of you may or may not know, the Jesuit Libraries Project is a multifaceted project centered around the digitization of Loyola's first library catalog and the subsequent creation of a virtual library system of VLS, if you will, based on that catalog. The library was a selling point for St. Ignatius College, and it was often featured in early promotional materials. The catalog is circa 1878, with around 5,200 titles and over 8,000 volumes. The catalog is divided into 6 divisions: theology, literature, history, philosophy, pantology, and legislation. My work with this project involved analyzing the process of data visualization and identifying the ways in which the catalog could best be visualized. Our process involved a number of steps and several different technologies, including spreadsheets, mapping applications, charts, and an integrated library system. First, the catalog was scanned into the university archives, and then transcribed by students into an Excel document. Here I have a scan of page 55, as well as the transcription of that page. This beautiful cursive handwriting makes it impossible to use optical character recognition software, and is sometimes, often, difficult to read after you've been staring at a computer screen for a couple hours. I'll point out this line as an example of an issue we faced. At first glance, Gerald seems to be an acceptable transcription of this line. However, after cleaning up the data and doing an in-depth analysis of imprint locations in the catalog, I believe this to be Gand, not Gerald, which in English translates to Ghent, which is actually a place, whereas Gerald isn't. Misspellings in the transcription affected our next step of creating maps in order to actually see where the titles came from. We used both Batch Geo at the top and Google Fusion tables. You can click on a location and the titles published there will pop up with all of the data. This is a really interactive way of studying and learning from the data, and the public historian in me loves this technology. I also created charts to study the data. Numbers don't really let you connect with the data in the same way that maps do, but they are useful in laying out the information in a very accessible manner. Through the charting process, I was able to uncover 2 very distinct trends. First, I noticed that the majority of the books in the catalog were published in the mid to late 1800s. This is true of both the chapter I showed earlier, which is the top chart here, and the larger theology division, as you can see below. The second trend I noticed was the recurrence of several imprint locations. New York, Paris, London, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Dublin, and Boston are in the top 10 for both this chapter and the entire theology division. New York, as you can see, is even first on both lists. These 2 trends are so strong that they occur throughout every division of the entire catalog. You can see this here where I have the divisions broken down by each decade. My imprint locations one was really too big and kind of ugly, so I didn't show you guys here. I'll bring your attention to some of the issues we faced after digitization. An issue in terms of cataloging is that sometimes multiple imprint locations were recorded per title. You can see this here with New York and Montreal, Berlin and Münster, and Lyon and Paris. Our question is this: do we follow current cataloging rules, which sometimes change the order in which these locations were recorded, or do we create an exact digital replica of our catalog? In addition, there is an issue of multiple imprint locations being recorded for a single place. Paris, as you can see, is the perfect example of this. The locations on the left column of this slide are 10 different ways in which Paris was recorded in our catalog. While a few of these are certainly transcription misspellings or errors, the 2 columns on the right are place names that have been identified as Paris. So my list of 10 could definitely have been much longer. This example is just one of 49 instances in which I identified locations that were recorded or transcribed as multiple versions. This affects our attempt to map the data as well as the manner in which the information is ultimately recorded in our virtual library system. Lastly, 182 of 454 unique locations given in our catalog are still unknown. Either they are indecipherable or illegible, or the locations just don't exist in our current world, or at least as far as I could find with my limited resources. Ultimately, what we struggle with is the desire to stay true to the historical record of the catalog while trying to make it as accessible as possible to visitors of the virtual library system. The information recorded in the original catalog obviously doesn't match up with our modern cataloging standards, making this an interesting project in itself, as well as for me personally, because I started library school in May. In the future, I see this virtual library system as a way of including and studying the early catalogs of other Jesuit institutions. An online catalog of multiple universities would make for some interesting analysis. Are the collecting habits different by institution? Do they follow certain trends? Do they set their own trends? Is location and time of establishment a factor, etc.? So, apologies if any of this is somewhat boring today. This is just a brief look into what I was doing. My paper had, I think, 35 pages of appendices, so there's a lot more data where this came from if anybody's interested after this. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Michael Polowski, and I'm currently a graduate student here at Loyola. I worked under Dr. Stephen Schlosser during the senior year of my undergraduate career. I first met Dr. Schlosser while taking his historical methods class in the fall of 2012. It was this class that really changed my outlook on history. The following semester, Dr. Schlosser approached me with the opportunity to do research under him during the upcoming summer. The goal of the research was twofold. Firstly, it was to create digital maps that centered on correspondence sent to and from the Jesuit missionary in the United States, Father Pierre-Jean DeSmet. My project focuses on a small selection of his more than 5,000 letters that he sent while on his travels in the Northwest Territory. The second goal of the project was to explore the different ways that technology can be used to visualize information. The content being the letters of DeSmet, and the visualization being the maps that I created. These letters, to my knowledge, have never been used in such a way that I had used them. Father Pierre-Jean DeSmet was a Jesuit missionary who did most of his work in the Northwest Territory. He traveled on foot, visiting the Native American tribes. His influence helped to broker treaties between the United States government and the Native Americans. He petitioned all over the world to raise money to build missions and to evangelize the natives. Throughout his travels, he would write letters to various recipients, sometimes writing over 10 letters in a single day, sometimes even while he was traversing the wilderness. So I asked Dr. Schlosser what sorts of things he was looking for what he was looking to highlight in my presentation. He told me to look at a single month. And right here, as you can see, this is the single month that I took. The little black triangles that are shooting out from right here it was meant to demonstrate the far-reaching locations that DeSmet was sending his letters to. I too used the Google Fusion tables, so here you can, if it works, there we go. So clicking on one of the dots pops up with the information that I received from the Excel spreadsheet that had all 5,000 letters in them. And so I went through and tried to figure out what each letter was about and who it was sent to, and Dr. Schlosser and I kind of tried to figure out what the content of each letter was. So I used the Google Maps API and JavaScript, which may not sound familiar to many out here, but as a computer science major, as I am currently as a master's student, JavaScript is simply a coding language, and the Google Maps API is the engine that runs the map right here. Now you're looking at this, and you might be thinking it looks sort of familiar to maybe Google Maps on your phone, and that is I use the same program that Google uses to create their own software. So for the second and third, so this was one map, I made a total of 3 maps. For the second and third maps, I used this website called MyHistro. And MyHistro was originally created to be a social media website. The website was originally created to be where you could create timelines for your family and friends. Like if you go down to Lou Malnati's on Saturday, you could throw it on here and then show it to your friends. But I took it and I took all the maps, or I took the letters from my previous map and I displayed them on here. And click here. And it'll go through and I map them on this map here. And every couple of seconds it rotates to the next one. But as I was looking through here, you can, it shows the letters and how frequently they were sent. There we go. So this is one example of one of the time periods that DeSmet was sending multiple letters very frequently in a small amount of time. So the third and final map, which is actually this one right here, uses 88 letters that were sent to 2 people, John Gilmore Shea and Edward Dunnigan. Edward Dunnigan ran a firm, Edward Dunnigan and Brother, and the firm published many religious books, including a widely used edition of the Bible and Dunnigan's American Catholic Almanac and List of the Clergy, as well as other non-religious texts. After inputting all the data that was relevant to the letters, I noticed several clusters where DeSmet would mail one person or another with increased frequency. This timeline feature on MyHistro enabled me to see the different clusterings of letters that DeSmet was sending out and to whom they were addressed. Using that information, it was possible to ascertain the possible topics of these letters without reading them. The road to completing these maps wasn't straightforward. I spent many evenings hunched over computers, staring at the computer screen with bloodshot eyes, trying to figure out how to accomplish these digitally. I must say, though, that the use of digital media and digital expression has changed my perception of history. I consider myself very fortunate to have been given the opportunity to work on this project. As I said earlier, I am currently a graduate student here at Loyola. I'm studying computer science, and working on this project in no small part influenced me to do so. I hope somewhere down the road I could revisit another digital media project, as this past one has such a positive experience. Thank you.
So as Dr. Roberts said, my name is Hope Shannon. I'm a second-year PhD student in the Joint United States and Public History doctoral program here at Loyola. I worked on 3 sort of related projects for Crossings and Dwellings, the exhibition that's downstairs that hopefully you have all seen by now, and if you have not, you need to go by tomorrow because it's closing. These 3 projects spanned the course of 9 months, so from January when we started until next week when the last part of this project for me ends. For each, I used digital tools to communicate and interact with public audiences. So there were two big components: creating content that would be part of the exhibition, and also figuring out how to get people, members of the public, interested in the content that we were creating. The first two projects fulfilled requirements for a class that Dr. Roberts taught in the spring, this past spring, Public History, New Media. For the first of these two class projects, I worked with a group to construct a communications plan that LUMA, which is the museum, Loyola University Museum of Art, that LUMA could use to convey messages about the exhibition to Loyola University faculty and staff. So there were several groups working. Other groups built plans targeting other Loyola populations, like Loyola undergraduates, Mundelein alumni, and Loyola alum. For the second class project, each group made a digital exhibit and video focused on one of the major objects from the exhibition downstairs. So the digital exhibits and videos were incorporated into the main exhibition and are accessed by iPads in the galleries. So if anybody who's been downstairs has noticed that there are iPads around, I hope you looked at them because they have a lot of the digital exhibits that were created in class. You can view them on there. For the third project, after the class finished, LUMA hired me as an intern to implement the communications plans and help finalize the digital exhibits that came out of the class. So we were trying to figure out a way to implement the stuff that we had done in class in the real world of the museum, sort of connecting them. So for the first project, the communications plan, my group had to think about how we could attract Loyola faculty and staff to the exhibition. This is a lot harder than it sounds. We learned that the museum had struggled to reach faculty and staff in the past. They had a long history of really failing to do this successfully. So to address this issue, we developed a plan that attempted to build a stronger relationship between faculty and staff and the museum. We suggested that the museum adopt 2 to 3 what we called Museum Fridays, Fridays on which Loyola departments would allow non-essential staff to leave early to visit the museum. Faculty would also be encouraged to attend on these days. We hope that the designation of a day for faculty and staff to visit would help to create a small community of museum goers amongst Loyola employees. We suggested advertising these events in Loyola's student newspaper and on paper flyers posted around campus, the 3 campuses. We also suggested using digital communications channels used by Loyola's university marketing and communication department, including university Facebook and Twitter pages, the digital screens throughout campus, the university's blog, and through email to individual departments. For the second project, the video and digital exhibit, we created ours about Father DeSmet's deerskin coat, which hopefully, again, if you've been downstairs, you noticed. It's one of the exhibition's marquee objects. The other class groups did the same things for other objects downstairs. Each group created its digital exhibit using Omeka, which is a publishing software that you can use to create digital exhibits. You can also use it to do a few other things, but that's what we were using it for. And we made the videos using Apple's iMovie program. The video we created uses the deerskin coat to tell a story about how Father DeSmet and other Jesuits who crossed into the American West and engaged in how they engaged in cultural exchange with Native Americans living near the missions. The digital exhibit explains some of these same themes, including exploration, frontiers, and cultural exchange, but it goes into a little bit more detail. So I just pulled up some slides to show you kind of just what the digital exhibit looks like when you're actually on a computer or on one of the iPads. The video you can see on the top left. So this is Omeka. This is the digital exhibit publishing software, but you can embed videos that have been uploaded to YouTube, a separate website. You can embed those videos into the digital exhibit. So this is the video embedded into the exhibit. There's more, but just for the sake of time, I'm just going to show you a couple. So just the first slide. Just trying to keep it visually interesting. People are not all that interested in reading large blocks of text, so trying to break it up. People would click through these one by one, and I'm going to leave it on this one, so feel free to read it while I talk. So during their creation, the communications plan and the video and digital exhibit provided a lot of public and digital history challenges. One that spanned all of this was the issue of accessibility. So we had to consider how to make the exhibition accessible to digital natives. So if you're not familiar with that term, that's basically people raised in the more recent digital world. You know, like the 9-year-old kids who just zoom through iPads and just seem to know it without having to learn it because it's just second nature to them. How to make it accessible to them and also to digital immigrants. So people, I didn't make up the term, but perhaps some or even people who have some or even a lot of digital experience or proficiency, but who had to pick it up as the world kind of changed around them. So my group's communications plan uses both digital and non-digital media for this reason. Since we were trying to reach faculty and staff, the ages of the people in that group vary so widely. So we use the internet and social media as well as physical advertising like the newspaper, like the local student newspaper. In addition, the video and the digital exhibit present information that the larger exhibition also includes. We didn't put anything in there that we didn't think people could not, that we wanted to make sure that what we put in the digital exhibit and the video was also somehow in the exhibition. We didn't, just in case people weren't really interested in that component, we didn't want to make them, we didn't want them to miss out on, a central story. So you'll notice that, for example, all of this information is in various places down in the exhibition, this slide here. But this is kind of situating it in a different context. So it's another way of telling the story. We're focusing here on gift giving. We decided that we wanted to tell a story about how the deerskin coat was a part of larger, that was a thing that Native American groups and Jesuits often did, was exchange gifts. So we decided to focus on that story, which is also available downstairs, but this is a more direct way of telling it. We also had to grapple with the differences between how audiences interact with and learn from digital media and how they interact with and learn from physical exhibitions. So what could we impart in the video and digital exhibit that we couldn't convey through the real deerskin coat? What were the advantages to using digital tools? There's certainly pros and cons to either side. One distinction is the way in which each tells stories in the context of an exhibition. So the larger exhibition, when you're down there, there's so much going on. There's so many storylines that are all sort of wound together into a complex web that tells a larger, longer story of crossings and dwellings over the course of several hundred years. But the video and digital exhibit pull one of those storylines out and provide a more focused look at a particular object. So in the physical exhibition, the deerskin coat and other objects are supporting characters, but in the video and digital exhibit, they're actually the protagonists in their own more focused story. So we also had to consider our primary audience in ways that we could attract interest from a broader public. The communications plans we made in class focused on strengthening lines of communications between Loyolans and LUMA. But the third component of my involvement with this was after class ended, I took on an internship with LUMA, as I said, to implement these plans. So as a LUMA intern, I attempted to expand LUMA's reach beyond Loyola to a larger audience. While university marketing and communications spread the word about the exhibition through their traditional marketing channels like radio, newspapers, and magazines, my job was to seek the lesser-known channels. And since LUMA had almost no money to spend on marketing, almost all of my efforts were digital. So I found social media accounts and email addresses for churches, Jesuit and Ignatian groups, and Catholic schools in the Chicago area, and reached out to them and asked them to share information about the exhibition with their email lists, on their websites, and on their social media pages. I could talk for a whole nother 25 minutes about how successful or unsuccessful that was. Ultimately, each class project, as well as the internship, incorporated digital elements into public history settings. I think a lot of times in public history work, digital tools are just used for the sake of using digital tools. But in the case of crossings and dwellings, they were really beneficial in a number of ways. The use of creative social media and email provided new outreach opportunities for a museum that has almost no advertising budget for this kind of work. Digital strategies allowed us to locate groups relevant to the museum's mission and to the message of the exhibition, and to contact many of these groups without the prohibitive costs that come with formal advertising. And these ties they don't have just now because of Crossings and Dwellings. They can use them now going forward with the rest of their exhibitions. In addition, the use of digital exhibits and videos as supplements to the larger exhibition provided the curators with multiple ways to engage the exhibition's diverse audiences. So if you'd like to see more of the digital exhibits, like I said, my group's was just one of 6, so there's 5 additional ones. Please make sure that you go downstairs and look at the iPads. The videos are also posted separately on YouTube under LUC History is the username. So I encourage you all to take a look at those. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Evan Thompson. I am a senior undergraduate here at Loyola University studying history. 130 years ago, a librarian wrote down every book that was contained within the brand new St. Ignatius College library. Coming up to the present day, I became involved in this project purely on a whim from a professor of mine, Dr. Mark Bosco, recommending me for the internship. Up until this point, my experience with books in college was paying $300 a semester for them, not having to crack them open because the professor either wrote it or, of course, it's not going to be on the test, and then giving them back to the bookstore for a couple bucks. My beginnings in this project did not improve this experience. I started out by digitizing the catalog itself, taking pictures of it, making sure that we could see them properly, and then I began the transcription of that document. So I'm probably the reason that you can't read it. My fault, I'm sorry. But overall, I did find it to be a very enjoyable experience, and I came back after the summer and a semester abroad to discover that the project itself had expanded into completely new directions. We had discovered that there are a great many of the books still remaining, so we began the work of digging through the libraries themselves to see what we could find. Mostly we found books that were old, broken down, rotted. If they were lucky, they were taped up. If they were unlucky, they weren't there anymore. But we did find some very interesting finds. This is a small book, The Words of Jesus by John R. Macduff, over 150 years old. If you'd like to read the book, there's the URL address. It's in public domain, it's very easy to find. But this particular volume has something special about it. Mary E. Thorne from Mary Sprague, Christmas, 1859. This book was a gift given over 150 years ago. Perhaps that's not significant enough. Mary Sprague is the great-great-grandmother of a good friend of mine. Discovered purely by chance, this friend of mine just graduated Loyola University last year. So perhaps there's a little bit of family history to be found, but maybe there's something more significant to see. Extremely long title, another of the volumes that we have. There's the URL if you'd like to read it. It's very boring, I promise you. But here's what was within it. It's a little hard to read itself, but the gist is, taken from the home of the Reverend James A. Harold, Falls Church, Fairfax County, Virginia, late rector of St. Andrews Free Church, Washington, 1861. This is a book looted during the Civil War by a Union soldier. But we, of course, have to bring it around. Here is that soldier. because we discovered in his journal him discussing taking this physical book. We only discovered this because of using a social media website known as Flickr, which allows us to share the pictures that we have taken here and ask people, what do you think of them? What do you know of them? Can you find anything? Someone pointed this out to this very journal. So we continue to photograph everything that we can see, and we put them up online, hopefully to find something that people haven't seen before, or something that someone has seen but they haven't been able to connect it. This isn't just family history, it isn't just American history, it's also Catholic history and the study of St. Ignatius College itself, which is part of Chicago's history. The Provenance Project was a very different beast than I ever expected to encounter while I was in college. By using digital technology to do history, I learned that technology is truly being embraced by the historical community, which it must continue to do. Most of the difficulties that we faced over the course of this project were not because of this new technology, despite the public domain addresses leading to some of these books no longer being valuable. Most of our difficulties were because others did not want to adapt to what could change the face of history itself. The advantages are tremendous, though, allowing for flexible schedules, universally understood procedures, and a very streamlined process that enabled us to photograph, edit, and upload photographs in batches of hundreds or even thousands at a time. We have broken over 100,000 views on our Flickr website, which if you would like to visit is on the sheet of paper in front of you with Jesuit Libraries Provenance title. I would love to see what new audiences history could reach with more versatile subjects and this new technology, especially if we can create a Flickr site of old books and nothing more that over 100,000 people want to see daily. Thank you.
Let's put Father Roberto back up. Well, great. Well, thanks again to Steve and to Kyle for inviting me here. Over the past year and a half, because I work on Catholic book history, I've enjoyed watching this project grow from conversations over lunch to classroom discussions with Kyle's students to the projects represented here this afternoon. Implicitly, these 4 papers share a basic question. How do we turn Catholics and Catholic stuff into data that can then be analyzed and turned back into new knowledge about our subjects of study? Each of the presentations really featured a new way of visualizing this data. Timelines and charts, photo collections, audio, video, and downstairs in the multimedia supplements to the exhibition. These visualizations, I think we can all agree, help bring this 1870s shelf list of books from St. Ignatius College to life. I appreciate that Jessica and Evan note that this work is not always glamorous. Transcribing and cleaning data can be tedious, but the results, as Michael and in fact all of you argue, might change our perceptions about this history. Their data sets underscore the undeniable fact that the brother and sister builders that we're here to talk about this weekend were hard at work building libraries too, as Catholic institutions multiplied across the US. So despite Kyle's glowing introduction, I'm gonna go analog for a little bit. And I wanna say a few words about the Jesuit Library Project as Catholic book history before contextualizing this digital turn. Catholics, like many 19th century Americans, found themselves harnessing and theorizing the power of the press as never before. After the Civil War in particular, religious men and women frequently addressed the important subject of what they called good reading, what constituted it, and how to direct lay people to find it. This kind of discussion filled the Catholic publications that I read, writing my dissertation. Instructions, including the 1885 Baltimore Catechism, reminded Catholics that the Church forbid the reading of bad and immodest books and newspapers. Catholics may have been in the business of prohibiting books, but they also collected a wide range of texts for their libraries. Here, I think Jessica's point about the contents of St. Ignatius Library is a really important one. Of the 8,000 volumes, roughly 40% on her chart showed 40% of those books were theology, but 47% were history and literature. American Catholics read incredibly widely. The Jesuit Libraries Project merits comparison, I would say, to another prominent example of Catholic library building right here in Chicago, the Columbian Library of Catholic Authors, assembled for the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. Organizers bemoaned the fact that no private library or institution of learning in the US had a complete collection of books by Catholic authors published in the US, and their sort of completism is charming. They really wanted everything. To build a library for this Chicago event, organizers solicited, quote, living authors, publishers, relatives, and friends of deceased authors to send all of their specimens and their books to Chicago. By the time the fair opened, just 2 decades after St. Ignatius, about 3,000 books had been contributed to the cause, including 128 Jesuit-authored volumes. As part of the larger Catholic educational exhibit, the presence of Catholic books at the Columbian Exposition was meant to portray that, and I quote, "The work of Catholic schools compares favorably with that of the secular and state institutions, a visible and positive refutation of the statements that the Catholic Church is opposed to intelligence." After the close of the World's Fair, the chief organizer of this book exhibit sought out a sponsor to purchase the entire Columbian Library. Loyola did not take it. In 1894, they placed the books with what was then called the Catholic Reference Library at Notre Dame. And I first met Jean in the Notre Dame Library trying to seek this out when I started finding marks in the books I was reading at Notre Dame for my dissertation research. The history of how those books are cataloged is incomplete. Most can be found today in Hesburgh Library's general collections, and I could have used Michael's expertise working on this Provenance project as I sifted through the various clues imprinted on the physical objects, tying them back to 1893. So I mentioned the case of the Columbian Library of Catholic Authors to suggest the Jesuit Libraries Project is really a model or a resource for expanding our studies of what Catholic education meant to Catholic leaders. What kinds of libraries were housed in the high schools and colleges we've been talking about this weekend? What books did religious men and women deem necessary to collect? Did women's schools fill their shelves differently than St. Ignatius? That's a question I'm hoping to answer in the future. How did these books circulate? Here, we should turn to the panel title, This Digital Future, that Kyle named our panel. I'm gonna quote Kyle. Writing about this project, he says, researching and reconstructing the titles in the Jesuit Library Catalog raises new questions about the intellectual and spiritual life of Catholic students and educators. The answers to these questions take on different shapes depending on the tools, analog or digital, used to interrogate our sources. An important aspect of the Jesuit Libraries Project is the way in which it has demonstrated, I think, the utility of these different kinds of tools. Digital history, many would argue, is nothing without a willingness to experiment, even if that means we have to be a little more open to failure and talking about those failures along the way. And so something I really appreciate about this panel, and historians don't really always love to do this, is to create space to talk about experimentation and exploration, about process as well as the products, an ethos that I think Kyle would agree that digital humanists really inspire us to embrace. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that the Jesuit Libraries Project should be considered part of a small but really growing body of work in American history that employs digital tools and methodologies to interrogate questions of religion. So if other speakers have drawn attention to historiographical trends, I thought I could mention a short list of current projects that should be on our radar. Just down the street at the Newberry Library, historians Chris Cantwell and Danny Green had led the development of a project called Faith in the City, something that's going to map data and texts from the Newberry's collections with interpretive essays exploring religion and urban life in Chicago from 1870 to 1920. Aaron Bartram, a grad student at UConn, and Lincoln Mullen, now at George Mason, created the American Converts Database, a crowdsourced collection of records that allows us to explore biographies of 19th century religious converts and their familial, social, and religious relationships. This is just one of Lincoln's projects using religious data, and I direct you to usreligion.blogspot.com, the website of the group blog Religion in American History, where he often writes about this research, and many of us in this room write too. And this goes to Hope's point about how we actually share these projects, particularly in a world where resources are lacking. Closer to my current institution, Bryn, my colleague Michelle Moravec at Rosemont College is experimenting with digital humanities in the classroom. Most recently, she sent her students to Rosemont's Chapel of the Immaculate Conception to begin to build a digital project examining the history of this group of sister builders outside of Philadelphia and their chapel's 20 stained glass windows depicting the sanctity of learning through images of 20 female saints. I won't give on with these kinds of projects given our time constraints, but it suggests that the digital future of Jesuit studies will not be lacking for conversation partners. We've also become savvier about social media for sharing our work. Did you know that this conference has a hashtag? In their 2005 book, Digital History, A Guide to Gathering, Preserving, and Presenting the Past on the Web, Dan Cohen and the late Roy Rosenzweig argued, a well-built, well-designed, and well-stocked history website is still like a tree falling in the digital forest if no one visits it. As Hope reminded us in her presentation, these digital projects merit communication strategies that offer the possibility of engaging a larger public, with our research, either from the comfort of their home computer or while strolling through the actual exhibition galleries. And like Hope said, I hope you took advantage of the really wonderful multimedia available on the tablets in the galleries. By training history students to think critically about engaging audience, plural, audiences, with our research, public and digital history programs have a lot to teach the rest of us. So I hope it's clear that an important measure of the Jesuit Libraries Project is not only the discovery of and increased access to the original texts themselves, but also skill building and training in digital methodologies. The project expands our subject knowledge about Catholic books and Catholic libraries, about formal Catholic education, and about communication circuits, but it does something else. It serves, I think, as a pedagogical model, expanding our vision of what kinds of work can be undertaken in undergraduate and graduate history classrooms. And I would argue it suggests that our students are sometimes some of our best collaborators. So if there is time remaining.
Yes, we have 10 minutes.
I would like to open this up to questions. Maybe we can all come up here. And I'd like to throw one out that we might talk about now or later in the day. The panelists have reflected on how their work has influenced them, but we also know that because something is digital doesn't mean that it's forever. And I'd like Kyle to perhaps tell us about plans to continue the research after the galleries are deinstalled, and we can think of together about sustainability, what are the digital legacies of the weekend, and faculty-student research for crossings and dwellings.
Thank you, Dawn Eden, doctoral student, University of St. Mary of the Lake. Just a couple of footnotes to your introduction with regard to Father Busa that might be of interest to anyone who might be considering doing research on Father Busa. His work with the Index to Mysticus would make for a very interesting dissertation on how one Jesuit and those working with him helped to presage the digital revolution and also some of the problems that arose with it. The first thing is with regard to intellectual property, and this goes to the sort of age-old dispute between Jesuits and Dominicans. At the time of the Index to Mysticus, the St. Thomas catalog, so to speak, was known in its critical edition, the Leonine edition, which was created by a papally appointed panel of Dominicans who would create the official critical editions. Now, what Father Busa did in making Thomas's oeuvre available digitally was essentially to take this intellectual property that had been under the control, so to speak, of Dominican experts and translate it or transfer it into a different medium and make it available popularly to anyone with a computer, with a CD-ROM drive, and now to anyone with the internet. So there are all sorts of intellectual property issues that come up that are interesting to study. The other thing is simply that there's a very good article online, I don't know the title of it, that talks about how it was because of Father Buse being very persistent with Mr. Watson, the head of IBM, that an electronic language was developed to make Thomas Aquinas' works available on the internet. And this language is known as Hypertext Markup Language, HTML, which is the language that made the World Wide Web possible. So I think that the Society of Jesus has a much better claim than Al Gore to having invented the internet. Thank you.
I think one of the, maybe a question that I want to build on Monica's questions, but throw one to our up and rising scholars here. One of the fears I think that maybe many people have is that the digital will replace the analog, right? That the books that we love and cherish will become digitized and there'll be no need for them anymore. And I'm curious, when you're posed with that question, is the analog going away?
I think that's ridiculous because the digital wouldn't exist without the analog. And that's as basic as it gets for me, at least.
Is there an analog future?
I mean, there's absolutely an analog future. Like you said, the digital exists because of the analog itself. And because we were going to throw away the analog, I mean, that's the reason that we've created these projects in the first place, is to preserve it. We digitize it just to make it more accessible.
And the way the circle comes around, and I don't know if Sarah is here, Sarah Bartolome, who you heard from yesterday, in fact, went through the Flickr before she visited our special collections, right? She was looking for the materials. There's a researcher up in Montreal who wants to reconstruct the Library of La Flèche, and he's looking at our materials and looking at the stamps. So this becomes a way, right, of opening the doors of the archive. Oh, did you?
Well, I think also that sometimes when compared with digital things, we're assuming that digital means progress, and so analog, analog automatically sometimes means that it's not progress, somehow that the two are completely, one is old and one is new, but people interact with material objects in a much different way than they interact with digital media. And so if you have, like with the Deerskin Coat, if you have the physical object next to something that's telling a similar story in a digital form, you're experiencing them completely differently because the object exists. It has, it's made of fabric. It might smell a particular way. You interact with material things differently. You remember differently because of them. We remember in a very sensory way, and so I think sometimes it's either one or the other, and it's not. The two should work together.
I wanted to add too, I think the Provenance project particularly shows us the way that, as we know, Catholics interacted with a world of things, and books as some of those things are incredibly important objects. So something that I like about seeing this project online is it makes me feel less bad about all the times I was up at Loyola's library with a prayer card falling out of a book and immediately emailing rare books librarians and curators to say, I put it back on the shelf, but here's the call number and it should probably go in a collection. You don't always see that on the copy that's been scanned and put online, and we don't always know what happens to those other things. So the sort of toggling back and forth between the two of these, I think each of the students have shown really nicely how both are still very necessary.
Do you want to tell us a little about what your digital futures are?
Well, I mean, I'm in library school, so everything we're doing is, I'm actually learning HTML, so that's kind of fun. But yeah, everything is always relating to the digital, and even I'm doing an online program actually, so most of my books are available digitally, which is great because I'm in Idaho and we don't have a great library system out there. So I like to see more books, more of that happening. And I think that that is and can be a way of the future without losing the published book as well.
Well, for me, since I'm a master's in computer science, that's pretty much my entire future. I actually just finished a midterm where I had to develop an algorithm for a program that I had to write. So it's completely digital.
Part of the deal and me writing letters for Michael to get into that program was that he's my servant now. I think one of the things, and then I'll pop it out if we have, and I just want to give a plug as Monica was sort of opening up to what Loyola wants to do, and by Loyola I mean me and my collaborators, towards our digital future. One part is that the Jesuit Libraries Project and the Provenance Project are built on expansive platforms. We want not just St. Ignatius College in the 1870s, but we want Boston College in the 1890s, we want Georgetown in the 18 teens, we want Marquette, we want SLU. We want to think expansively. We want to start thinking about the wonderful questions that have been raised today about, well, what does it mean? I think one thing we haven't talked enough about here, but it keeps coming up, is how different orders have different ethnicities in the 19th century. Do Germans in Western New York collect different things than the Irish in New England? Versus the Italians on the West Coast, how does that story start to come together? How can we also, though, reconstruct libraries? I think we often have this sort of misconception that libraries are stable entities. They're not, right? Libraries in the 19th century only came together because monasteries were pillaged under Napoleonic Wars, right? If you look at the number of books that came from older European collections that had to be taken apart in order for this collection to grow, how can we start reconstructing? Think about the suppression itself. It's probably one of the greatest acts, most violent acts of humanity against learning, right? The destruction of hundreds of libraries in that time. So thinking about how we can bring these back together. To give a plug for our project partners, the work that Michael did was instrumental in talks that David Morose and I have had about trying to find conservation money. 5,000 letters by DeSmet are held at the Midwest Jesuit Archives, which has a new name, which I'm not using, but I should. Okay, it's fine. Y'all. Okay, Jesuit Archives, Central United States, in case you're connected with funding bodies and you see that proposal come through. But those materials need conservation, but then can be digitized, and then we can start to analyze, and we can start to think about DeSmet, who I think has really come out of this exhibit as a forgotten figure, right? Who really, was well published in the 19th century, has fallen off the radar, but is a phenomenal individual for thinking about the way in which these sort of European Jesuits are coming over and making these sort of fascinating interactions, but retain their cosmopolitanism, and we see that through the correspondence. I'm hoping many of you have ideas as well, and I hope that you will be in touch with us with your ideas, because I think we need to work collaboratively, not just within the university, but within all of our universities, because I think there's more strength in numbers. Let me head 2 more questions.
Yes, I'm a non-native digital person to begin with, but my understanding of digitization is it's for accessibility. And so my question is, as we digitize or we plan what to digitize, what do you foresee as how rapid is the change in technology going to be when we have to whatever the next word is, those documents? Because it's not preservation, it's what you were just speaking of, conservation. But do you have any idea, could see into the future, how rapid that change in technology will be that will affect what we've done a year ago or so?
Well, I don't know if I can answer the whole question, but I think part of it actually takes care of itself in a strange way, because consider the difference now, 50 years ago and today, in how we actually create records. A huge proportion of records that are created now are actually created digitally from the get-go, and so they begin digitally. So I think that there will always be paper records, but as we move forward, they'll reduce, and I see the director of the WLA sitting behind you, who may also be interested in weighing in on this. Sorry, Nancy. So I think that's part of it. I don't know. I mean, even now, that's a huge initiative, and Jess may want to weigh in on like archival side, but that's a huge issue in archives now, is finding funding for digitization projects, trying to get most materials digitized. But I think there always will be a component of archives that are just not digitized because they can't be, or the funding's not there, or you just have certain things that you're prioritizing. If that all.
Well, yeah, storage is definitely going to be an issue in the future, just like it is for analog as well. You know, it's not unlimited up there in the cloud. You know, we pay for that, and so I think that there is a future, obviously, for all of, you know, books, for what's in our archives, for what's in our special collections. Certainly, it's definitely going to depend on funding. It's definitely going to depend on changing technology and storage, and those are the three issues that really have to come together in order for that to work properly in the future. Otherwise, we will lose what Hope has said, has been born digital already. Because, I mean, I'm not a software developer. I can't tell you when the next big thing's going to come out. I mean, otherwise we'd all be rich, right? But, you know, it will change, just like in the 80s we started using barcodes, and now we're using RFID tags for the National Archives, right? Well, they actually switched because, you know, money. But, you know, that's definitely going to be an issue. And I think that as long as we work, you know, as long as we get the funding and we have supporters monetarily, that archives around the country and colleges around the country will be able to save the documents and make them accessible digitally.
So one positive thing to add to this is, as technology expands and as we get better and better equipment, the storage devices that are used for these digital projects get more efficient and get larger. I mean, just in the past 10 years, we've, like, the SD cards for cameras have gone from so very small, and the first terabyte SD card was actually just commissioned, which is crazy. And so for the future, I think while it is something that could be an issue, I think as we continue to make more and more gains in the development of technology, that I think that will help keep up with all of the backlog of things that we still have yet to digitize. But I mean, I can't see the future, but I think we'll be okay as long as we have there's actually a steady stream, or there's a graph, and it's every 3 years I'm not entirely sure what the thing is, but it's every 3 years the processing power is squared. So as long as that trend continues, I don't think we'll.
Monica, maybe you want to give us some final words?
Sure. I mean, I was just going to say that I told some colleagues that I was more of a digital optimist in this talk than sometimes I am, but I think a big question for the kinds of progress that the students are mentioning here is that these resources in fact take money, and many of us are at a wide range of institutions, and I think if we leave on this point that Kyle's making about collaboration and what we can do together, I mean, we know the wide range of Catholic institutions with a very wide range of funding possibilities. And so thinking forward about the things, again, that historians don't always do well, which is working together on projects and sort of sharing in that project, is going to be important, because money makes decisions about what gets saved, analog and digital, and what kinds of these methods and projects can move forward.
As I think both Monica and I can speak to, for many people, doing this digital work is scary, right? It's not part of the training that we've received through our institutions, yet I think to offset that in many ways, those of us who do it are some of the most generous people that you'll meet. And so don't let this be a barrier. If you don't have the institutional structure to do it yourself, shoot us an email. Think about, we're happy to share our syllabi, we're happy when we can to share our server space, we're happy to share our platforms, right? I mean, that this is meant, we don't want any good idea to go to waste. And so take advantage of that. We'll do one very final question, and we'll.
Thank you. I heard Shannon mention that she did all this research. and you all did all the research and you worked hard. But on the marketing side, it fell down on the marketing side. So when you do all this research, and you use your mailing, you contact certain organizations, but how can you improve marketing? Because you could work hard, but if you don't market it, it's not. No one's going to see it. So I think it's lacking in marketing, which is the key also. So how can one improve marketing, Shannon?
So repeat that.
How could one improve the marketing of this conference? You mentioned that you did all this work and there was no dollars for marketing the conference.
How can we market this
Yeah,
conference?
or anything that they're going to do
Well,
now in the future.
I don't think that the marketing on this particular, you said you thought it failed, or that I gave them. I don't.
Basically analog marketing.
Oh.
Budget, digital marketing.
Okay.
Open Horizon?
I mean, I feel like there's always going to be a need for both. I don't know that I'm understanding entirely.
How do you market now?
How do we market now? Well, it's a combination depending on who you're trying to reach. But I think it's important to add that the marketing is one thing that I think is a part of public history education, at least in the program at Loyola. And so at least there's a place to talk about that. So it's not like Dr. Roberts said, hey, you have to do this, here you go. And I was like, I don't know. I had places to start because we discussed these kinds of things in the classroom. But
Can I end on an optimistic note?
Yes.
it's a combination.
Marketing is hard to let the inform the public.
Marketing is hard. But I
Marketing
think-
is you guys are all intelligent on what you're doing, but maybe marketing to get it out to the public.
I think that Hope's paper and all the students' papers combined really show us that these products that are coming out of the exhibition and museums, I can say as a former curator, have always struggled with this, but these digital products allow this exhibition to live on in really interesting ways. I can go back to my Catholic history class and use the videos that Hope's cohort made for the next few years that I'm teaching American Catholic history. I couldn't have taken them to Chicago. I couldn't have sent everyone to see this exhibit. But there's something here, this notion of accessibility, that of course doesn't get boots on the ground and into Luma as much as we'd like, but also makes a wide range of projects and exhibitions available for people really around the world to see and experience.
I fear that Steve Schlosser is going to come up with a big shepherd's crook and pull us off stage. So thanks to our panelists for a really exciting talk.